All right, fantastic. So everyone, welcome. Welcome to what's going to be, I think, an incredible webinar. ChatGPT is on everybody's minds, but we are very focused on what that means for enterprises. A couple of housekeeping rules. Please take the polls. We're going to be covering them in a little while, towards probably the middle part. Questions, please put them in the Q&A. You'll find that at the bottom tab of what you've got. We will try to answer as many as we can. Again, we've got a pretty big attendance list here. So anything that you want to ask, please put in there. We'll try to get through all of it. So, all right. So welcome to our amazing panelists. My name is Jyoti Balani. I am founder and managing director of FreshRiver.ai. And partners with the fantastic Motive team. We've been going on a lot of adventures together. This is the Openstream.ai team here. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourself because I clearly will not do full justice. We're going to begin with Dr. Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil Cohen. I'm chief scientist at Openstream. I've been doing natural language dialogue for the better part of 40 years. And I've been working in this space in many different areas, including both dialogue and multimodal interaction. So I'm pleased to be here and happy to answer your questions.
Fantastic. Dr. Weber?
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Weibel. I'm professor at Carnegie Mellon University and also at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. I spent equally 40 years plus on AI, mostly neural networks, actually, in the early days, and particularly the application to translation, speech translation, speech interaction, voice interaction. This is how I know all my colleagues here on the panel. Thank you.
Amazing. Sudhir.
Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. I'm Sudhir Prabhu, and I'm the co-founder and CTO for Vulcan Software. And I don't have 40 years, but I have 25 years experience in enterprise applications, primarily on all sides of the table as a consumer, as a consultant, and now into a product company. So, we are into customer service and ITSM products. So primarily into enterprise applications, have worked in the US and India.
Fantastic. All right, so let's dive in. I think everybody knows the stats, but I'm going to repeat them anyway. So ChatGPT went from 0 to over 1 million users in less than 5 days, which was 95% faster than the iPhone and Instagram. So we're definitely in the what I call the exponential age. So as the first order of business, enterprises need to have crystal clear clarity on the business outcomes and problems that they are trying to solve. What is your framework of thought around it? Let's first start there, Dr. Phil. What do you think? I mean, as a world-renowned expert in this field of human-computer dialogue, what's been your reaction to ChatGPT?
Well, on the one hand, it's amazing what a language model can do. Now, for everybody, and Alex, feel free to correct me, a language model essentially is an enormous collection of words and sentences such that the system tries to predict the next best word given a variety of words that have been issued so far. And the fact that this system can generate text that sounds reasonable is pretty impressive. But it does have some downsides, particularly for businesses. And you're going to have to, if you were to use it, you would have to be able to train it. And in order to train it, you have to give it your crown jewel, your business processes, your data, your customer logs, etc. And you need to be assured that that's secure. That is, that you're not polluted by data from other customers. You're not polluted by fakers, people coming on board saying things they shouldn't. So you need to be assured of both security and cost. Training this ultimately is very expensive, as some people are starting to find out. You need to be able to run it behind your firewall. It's not just a just trust us scenario, and that means huge expenses. But probably the most interesting, but in a negative way, unfortunately, thing about this general system is it doesn't tell you the truth. I think you've seen that on lots of articles, in the popular press. You can't count on it to tell you the truth. It'll say X is true, something is true, and then the next sentence it'll say it's false, and doesn't realize that it's got incoherent, consistent information. Well, that's a real problem for businesses. Just think of the reputational risk that happened to Google in one day with an $8 billion loss in its stock price because it made a single mistake. How much money can your company afford to lose? So it's being, not being predictable, and that's in part because it's a language model, is really important. In fact, the CTO, I'll quote him now, of OpenAI, Sutskever, said in a recent interview, "I think that neural networks are as successful as they are precisely because they are difficult to reason about mathematically," which is a kind of a strange thing to say. In other words, I don't know what this thing's going to do, and that's what makes it interesting, and that's why you're all here. It's because we don't know what it's going to do. Well, if you don't know what it's going to do, it's hard to argue that I should base my hard-earned business and my customers on it. So, you really need to think about where it can be useful. We, at Openstream, we're looking at places where it can be useful, like, for instance, paraphrasing, things of that sort. But, building your architecture and business around it could be problematic. And I think people should think carefully about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's used with caution, right? Should be a label all around right in front. Dr. Weibo, being a deep expert in neural learning algorithms, right, for speech and language processing, do you see ChatGPT as a new advancement in the field, or is it just, now it's out in the open and the masses have access to it? What are you thinking?
Well, I would agree with my colleague Phil to the extent that one needs to approach it carefully. There's a lot of hype around it. At the same time, though, one needs to be nuanced about it. I think the fact that you cannot explain what it's doing inside, or what that neural networks cannot explain, I happen not to see as a weakness, but as a strength. We as humans cannot explain how we put on the pants in the morning or the drive to work, etc. We do that almost semi-automatically, and we somehow do it, and we somehow learn it, and it works, right? It's also not that we as humans don't make mistakes. We do, and we sometimes have a hard time explaining it. As humans, we babble sometimes stupid stuff and don't really know. I think and there is clearly a revolution underway. I mean, that kind of growth that we're currently witnessing is not going to happen totally without consequences, without actually progress. But where it progresses and where it doesn't, I think is going to be a really interesting thing to watch, because I also do believe that there are some dangers and shortcomings of this technology. Like Phil said, it's only predicting the next couple of words. I'm a bit reminded of Joe Weizenbaum 30 years ago, who wrote this book, and he was a critic of AI then. And what he discovered was, with a very simple trick of paraphrasing the questions that people had almost, he managed to build a system where people poured their entire heart and problems into this system, reflecting their own problems into it. And he was shocked by this. So in a way, we need to be very, very careful between do we project too much into it? Do we believe it's as intelligent? Does it give us wisdom? Does it solve our world's problems? The answer is no. And there's reasons we can get into why I believe that way. At the same time, it's essentially a gigantic library on steroids that you can poke and extract the world's knowledge from the internet from. And if we can harness that, it surely will be helpful in many ways. And I think that is going to be the business imperative, in my view, is how do we tease out the important things and make sure we don't get hurt, right? Because like libraries, like tools, Clippy, like when your PowerPoint slides suggest a design, we all use these things, and they are incredibly powerful, except they don't come without review. We have to still stay on top of it. We need to see what we do with it, and we need to see that we integrate that into products properly. And that's going to be the challenge moving forward for the audience and for everyone else to see, where do we place this? How do we put this in, and how do we control it?
Yeah, it seems like magic, right? I mean, we all forget we're human, and how do we put our pants on in the morning, right? We sometimes forget. So when we see that a machine doing it, it can really mess with our minds, I think. Sudhir, you've got a deep and very broad background, right, in business transformation in the enterprise sector. What problems are you thinking ChatGPT will be able to solve, in current and future state?
Yes. So ChatGPT is today a question answer prompt, right? So anyone can ask a question and it gives an answer. It gives one answer, right? It's great for consumers, it's great for students, it's great for individuals, and in certain areas, right? So as a student, I want to understand a particular topic. Yes, I can ask it and it gives me a great answer. I want to write a small computer program to calculate the cube root of something, and it gives me the code either in Java or Visual Basic or whichever, right? So it's great for those kind of scenarios, right? At an enterprise level, it's also useful for people in departments like marketing, right? And you want to write a very impressive letter to the customer or to the prospect, right? You can ask it to write and it does. And it's great English, right? You can typically, if you look at the chats earlier, right, or the bots, you could write a sentence, but here you can write a paragraph, you can ask a full question, right? And it really understands. So it's good, it's verbose. And that's one of the biggest things that I found in the system. Of course, from an enterprise perspective, it's not ready, right? I mean, it gives one answer, the answer. If you ask 5 questions, we don't know if the consistency of the answer will be there, because, semantics play a very important role. You need to understand the domain very well. Today, ChatGPT by itself is derived from GPT-3, right? So it is, ChatGPT has no APIs, it's just a question answer prompt. So if you ask me, can I use ChatGPT today? No, I cannot in the enterprise, right? Can I build on GPT-3? Then you need training, and it's very expensive. You need the data, and it will be as clean as the data is. So if the incoming data or of the knowledge is not there, these systems will not work properly. So at this point, it's very limited. Even the CEO of OpenAI said that today it's very, very limited. So don't really use it in your production systems, right? So yeah, so it has some way to go for enterprises to really use it across their systems. It's some individuals in some areas, they can use it to summarize or paraphrase things, or to understand, or to write a letter. Those kinds of tasks are done well in ChatGPT today.
Yeah, I think you can see a lot of the headlines coming in, right? I think it was Vanderbilt University had to apologize because, with the unfortunate, horrific things that were happening, that they used ChatGPT to reach out to their community. And there's countermeasures coming, right? GPT-0. There was a student at Princeton who created that. So I think things are evolving. We're going to see a lot of experimentation and output, and I think people have to be very responsible about how they're going to use it. I think Microsoft announced that by the end of the year, they might release the model. I think, Dr. Phil, like you were talking about, is that enterprises could potentially use, their data. But I think we're a little ways off, still early days on there. So let's switch gears a little bit, right? Let's talk about enterprise grade conversational AI, right? And how enterprises should be thinking about deploying this tech to solve some serious business problems. right? So let's start with you, Sudhir. How are you thinking? How are you advising enterprises around that?
Yeah, so enterprises have multiple factors to look at before they decide on something like in conversational AI within their system, right? I mean, the first thing is it should be omni-channel, right? It should go across channels, and it's the conversational AI service that they have to look at. So it should work across social media, it should work across certain specific chatbots, across email systems, across voice systems, all of that, right? So it's the conversational AI service that will be pretty critical, right? So the second thing is the content itself, right? On what content will you build it? So the COO, the CEO should understand that it's the content that drives whatever outcomes you want, right? So the first thing that an enterprise needs is consistency of answers. One mistake can cost millions of dollars, right? One wrong
Billions.
answer. It's very important for the answers to be consistent. Questions can be asked in different ways, and we hope that the answers are consistent. So if somebody says, in my area, right, in ITSM, I say my router light is not blinking, right? And somebody else says my network is down, right? I mean, probably it's the same thing, right? And how do you understand those domain-specific jargons, right? So while language is good, it's the domain that also matters a lot, right? So it's the content. The third thing is the UI layer, right? Or the service layer should be orchestrated with the backend layer, because it should be self-service. It should complete a task. So if I tell something, it should not only recognize it, it should also complete the task using the integration. So how good is the system which will work integrated with other third-party systems, right? That's a very important consideration, right? And the fourth thing, the most important thing, is the planned dialogue, right? Is how do I walk a user through the process, right? Today, ChatGPT gives us one answer, right? How do you do a thing? It'll give you one answer. But typically in an enterprise, it's a flow, right? You want, you have to explain turn by turn, right? So do this thing and then give me the feedback. Based on that, I will take the next step, right? So that is pretty critical. So I think these are not covered. There are other systems, we use EVA or other systems which actually help us do it turn by turn. So yes, the English is great, the verbose is great, but it's basically how do I guide an enterprise user, whether it's an internal user, an HR user, an employee, or a customer, through the process that he has to follow and complete the task on hand. So, finally, it's the data security and privacy, right? As somebody said, right, you don't want one customer's answer, question or problem to be disclosed to another customer, right? So PII, which is personal identifiable information, should be excluded from the outcomes, right, from the responses. So is the system able to do that, right? So these are all the considerations that the enterprise should look at when resolving serious problems. And I'm not even talking about health insurance or medical fraternity, right? These are just general enterprises.
Yeah, Dr. Phil, what do you think? Oh, sorry, Alex, go ahead.
No, I just am reacting, but I think I'm a little bit more positive about, I think many of the problems will be addressed given that there is such enormous effort now and enormous interest and such broad interest that will have consequences. People will work on a lot of these issues. So for example, the issue of turn by turn one answer is something that can be addressed. It's already being addressed by iterating, right? You can have additional specifications and then have it iterate, etc. You can probably learn as you go and adapt. And given that it is a recognized problem, people will work on this. There is issues like no company wants it to hallucinate hate speech and things, and so they will spend a lot of effort making sure that gets filtered, etc. So again, this will be a societal dialogue. It will come in both ways. Do these companies now censor our speech on one side, and on the other side, do we let some GPT hallucinate crazy stuff at the same time? So, however, I think a lot of these things will gradually be worked through and technically answered. I do believe that it will not be, to me, the biggest danger is that we project too much of our humanity into it and put too much faith into it, and that gradually, hopefully, will converge on something that becomes a mega tool. I think the fear comes also from the fact that it will replace a lot of jobs. People are anxious about, will this replace my job? Again, I offer the analogy to what happened in machine translation when it came up. The same kind of arguments, that it had crazy translations that made no sense, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm reminded of the fact that initially it was only 1% of texts were translated by machine, and now it's more like 99%. Has it replaced human translators? Absolutely not. I'm good friends with Marco Trombetti, who runs a company that does human translation fed by AI. So there is machine translation, and then it gets touched up by a human to get the quality that people expect and the security that people expect. I think we'll get there in conversational AI too. Once we realize its weaknesses, we'll use it for stuff that is the mass product in a way, if you will, and at the same time then adjust it in a way that that can guarantee safety and privacy and so on. The topic of privacy, if I may, say that, add that also, that's a very interesting one. I think some solutions on federated learning where we put a layer of private knowledge that happens only locally on your servers on top of generic knowledge that is learned over all the internet, will eventually be something like, I was at a panel in Berlin a couple of weeks ago, where Germany and Europe is now starting a big initiative to build a European GPT-like thing, because everybody is nervous, saying, we can't let all of our knowledge and culture be dominated by one company in the world. And there is a danger in this, right? But I think as we will move forward, we'll see that lots of these solutions will be done, and also localized solutions that patch onto a generic library, if you will. So I think we'll work through a lot of interesting technical solutions that will get us back to realizing it's not all the world's answers, but that it actually does contribute something phenomenal, something new and different.
Yep. Yeah.
So I want to harken back to something Alex said, and something he just said, which is now the Europeans are particularly interested in getting involved in this. Now, one of the issues in Europe, of course, is GDPR. The systems need to be able to explain themselves, need to be able to be responsible for what they do and what they say. And if by design these systems are not explainable, then, and the fact that if you ask it a why question, you get something, but you don't have any confidence that that's actually causally connected to what actually happened. That is the reason why it said what it did. If you put too much trust in these systems, you're going to be in violation of these requirements, which frankly, I think the US and everybody in the world ought to have as well. So I'm particularly interested in systems that know what they're doing, that can plan their utterances, can figure out what to say, and are responsible for the facts that they relate to you. And we built such systems at Openstream, but nowhere near this kind of a scale. Now, this kind of a scale is such that you do end up with copyright issues, of course. It's sucking up all of the data that exists, and conceivably even spitting back somebody else's full sentences to you, or full paragraphs. And at what point does the copyright law come into being? It's actually an interesting question. Certainly the artists are very interested in this. And there was a science fiction publisher just announced that they're basically shutting down all submission of science fiction because they're having a hard time telling which ones are generated by ChatGPT, and because hallucinating is great in science fiction, and which ones are generated by humans. So students are having a field day doing this, and teachers are having a hard time deciding whether the students are learning anything much, other than how to issue a prompt. So I think it needs to be handled with care and finding the right places to incorporate it. And as one of the questions said, well, why do we really care about the truth? Well, look, if your doctor says you have cancer, or if your doctor GPT says you have cancer from all the data that we give you, you might actually care if it's the truth. An insurance company who's denying your claim, you might care if some of the information it tells you is truthful, or your mortgage has been denied, or any of these other potential uses for it. So the systems have to be both truthful and responsible for what they say. And of course, this is not an AI. It doesn't reason. It doesn't think. People will attribute all kinds of mental processing to it, when in point of fact, it isn't. So it's a simulation, and simulations, you can use wind tunnels and models and mock-ups for, simulating flight. That doesn't mean it's flying. And this doesn't mean it's talking.
Ultimately,
so people can get confused, as you said with Joe Weizenbaum, people can get convinced of of intelligence where there really is none. Although the originators of the technology say, well, it's got to be in there somewhere. There's semantics in there somewhere. Yeah, well, tell us about it. Where is it?
Of course, the big philosophical question is always, if you can't tell the difference anymore, is it between intelligence and artificial intelligence? Is it intelligent? Is the illusion reality, right? And I would say no, but that's, of course, a philosophical question we can debate until the...
Well, it's it gets to be a legal question too,
yeah.
right? Because people are going to be sued over this. Companies will be sued over this. They're responsible for what they say. In some cases, you have regulatory information about what you're allowed to say and not allowed to say. Now, in fact, you may be able to, there are rules about what ChatGPT can say, and it's somehow a base rules that we haven't been told much about how it does that. Make it into a rule-based system.
Yeah, I mean, we really need to draw the distinction between a philosophical discussion of what is intelligence and all the projections of and hopes people have in as humans, but they go into the metaphysical and they go into philosophical discussions, etc., versus the practical, technical use case. How do we bring this to bear?
That's precisely what I'm saying. It's the practical, technical case.
All right, gentlemen, I'm gonna interject a little bit because we're gonna move on to a couple of other things. By the way, if anything, as an analogy, when electricity was invented, someone came up with the fuse, right? Because it was likely electrocuting people, right? So use with caution, and there'll be an entire ecosystem. So let's. There's actually a lot of questions coming in. Let me start to take those before we move on, and I'm also going to talk about the poll results. So Olivia's asking, are there any key examples of companies already utilizing generative AI language tools successfully in industries such as finance and health, where data is particularly important to protect? How are they navigating the security concerns? Do you guys know of an actual deployment here from your guys' travels and people that you know?
I don't. I suspect everybody's trying it, but I don't know if anybody's actually deployed it in those use cases.
Yeah, I guess from an experimentation standpoint, right? Yeah, I guess everybody's trying it on their own. And I think we're seeing results of those experiments coming out. So recently Gartner, and everybody loves Gartner's Magic Quadrant, Openstream's recognized as a sole visionary for completeness of vision and ability to execute. I mean, those are two very huge fundamental areas, right? So with the extreme challenges for enterprises to visualize, select, and execute the appropriate conversational AI strategy and platform to deploy into their ecosystem, what advice do you have? I mean, there's got to be a framework because there's just so much to consider. What are you advising them relative to how should they think about it? Phil, Alex, if you could sort of start with you.
Sorry, repeat the question.
So the fact that Openstream has gotten, recognized for the most complete vision and the ability to execute, right? That means you guys have a framework that you're saying how to bring conversational AI, enterprise-grade conversational AI to life, right? How are you helping them think through industries? I guess there's two major industries that I think you guys are focused on, right? Insurance and healthcare. So in particular, what is it about those industries and those executives that you're guiding them in order to think about the vision for this and then actually executing it? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I should, of course, defer to Phil, who has much better insight. And I'm only an advisor. I'm advising a number of companies. As you know, I'm a research fellow for Zoom. Zoom is very active in this space, also using these tools and so forth. But as I would suggest, and I would believe that what we all will be doing is enhancing this ability of a ChatGPT with fact-checking, with better interfaces to give the user the choice, right? I mean, we already do this. In our lab at the university, we're using, if you not only focus on GPT, but generally these large models that are trained on lots of data on the internet, we use them in all, sorry.
No worries.
We use it in all of our systems in research already, in speech and in summarization, in translation, etc. So you'll see we'll use these as a resource and then put stuff on top that makes it usable, right? And the stuff on top is where then the added value comes from, where companies engage and deliver quality, right? You want ultimately quality, security, privacy, and that demands an interface that gives users the choice and technology that does that fact-checking.
Phil.
So we're doing something a little different, and that is, given your business processes, we are digesting your business processes and generating a planning system that attempts to have collaborative and cooperative conversations with the users by figuring out what, inferring on the basis of what you've said, what your problem is, and then putting its business processes and the actions that it can take to attempt to help you to accomplish why it is you're calling or interacting. And the system actually reasons its way through the dialogue and plans its utterances, and it has, and behind everything that it says, there's a plan of what it is trying to accomplish and what it is trying to get you to believe and what it thinks you're trying to get it to do. So we anticipate using a ChatGPT as a resource, but this particular approach is one that attempts to, I'm going to put it in quotes, think, unquote, that is to combine what you're saying and to infer your intentions and figure out how your intentions coordinate with what the system is capable of doing. So the idea of digesting your business processes and then the system can have a conversation. It doesn't need to know to be trained on how to have a conversation for each individual domain, though it can be guided by constraints about, don't say things like this, do say things like that, which is our corporate personality or our regulatory requirements. So we're looking to put a tool like this as a resource, not as the controller of how to interact with the customer. I believe that's not where it's designed for or best used for.
Yeah, I think tool is the definitely right word. So there, what's been your experience? You're on mute. If you could unmute, please.
So I think the important thing here is for each industry to understand the risks and, so language models like ChatGPT or even like Openstream, right? I mean, they're good at understanding English, but it's the domain phrases, the domain words. So like I give a very basic example of my router lights not working and the network is down, they need to be similar, right? They are similar problems, right? Does the model understand the similarity and give consistent answers across is very important. And as we just said, right, inferences in a medical industry can be very dangerous, right? To draw inferences directly can be risky. So yes, you have to proceed with caution. There are huge opportunities, but depending on the industry, the domain, the conversational AI should be either used as an assistant to summarize or to get help, but to use it directly in the system as the solution can be risky. So, and also the personal information, right? If I'm using it for customer service, and I have a knowledge base of, 1 million problems across customers, right? I hope that the information from one customer is not given to the other, right? So how do I separate the PII information, but I just take the gist? So it also depends on how the content is provided and how the layers of security and privacy are handled. So these are the things that will improve in the days to come. But at this point, these are the factors that it could take time for an industry to adopt it or for an enterprise to adopt it.
Yeah. A lot of the questions, I'm just looking at the flavors of them, right? Everybody, you should understand, these are very early days, right? So folks in the audience, very early days. It's almost like when I'm going to go back to the electricity example, when it was discovered, we still had to do, how do you use it safely, right? How do you harness it? So you have to think about it in the same way. And I think from an enterprise standpoint, you got to have all the stakeholders at the table, right? You're going to have your regulatory folks, security folks, and not just take it and run with it. Like when cloud was, 10 years ago, when we all started talking about the cloud, it started to be experimented. Reminds me a little bit of that until, more governance and compliance and regulatory models came in. I'm going to read out a little bit on what we're seeing with the polls here. Tremendous. We have a lot of folks on here. Thank you, everybody, for attending again, taking time off your day. So the first question was, are you currently involved in conversational AI deployments? 56% of you are, 44 not, but I'm pretty sure at some point you will. What is your primary role as a stakeholder in conversational AI in your organization? We have 20% of you are business decision makers, 30% of you are in technology and ops, and 31% of you don't have a primary role, and a little smattering of legal, regulatory, and financial. It's great. We do want folks that everybody needs to start thinking about this from their perspective. Have you interacted with ChatGPT? 86% of you did. Great. That's actually step number one. Go play with the tech. Understand it yourself. Please do not be armchair folks, just sort of taking in what other folks are saying. What is your perception of ChatGPT's use for enterprise-grade use cases? Options. It's going to solve all of our problems. 9% of you think that. Thank you for having that as a low number. 85% of you said need to use it cautiously. Ding, 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 ding. Right answer. 6% said it's been gaslighting me, as everybody's been experiencing. But hey, look, this is how technologies are born and harnessed. We all learn. We're all in this together from a human standpoint. There's just a ton of questions coming in the chat as well. Look, guys, you can go experiment with this, try it for trading, try it for brokering. I think somebody's actually trying to sell their products here. I think it's Stephen. If no soliciting, I should have said that as housekeeping rule as well. Okay. Part of what I also want to make sure, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, so I will probably take a couple more questions. Actually, let me take the questions first, and then we'll start to move to the other direction. Will Satkin said, so Dr. Cohen, as you indicated, being unable to trust models like ChatGPT is a central issue. What do you see as the next evolutionary step that might be taken to improve this? I guess in particular, Will's asking about ChatGPT itself. Like, what would you think the OpenAI team should do?
Well, I mean, there already has been some steps taken, which is to attempt to provide the sources for the information that it relates. Okay, so you have a conversational search engine, which is what it claims it is now. Oh, I'm only a conversational search engine, it says. And this is in the Bing iteration of it. And it is, in fact, attempting to show you the sources that where you can go and read for yourself. That's great if the sources are, in fact, accurate. I have no qualms whatsoever with use as a search engine. And just as I don't trust everything I find on the internet through current search tools, you know, I'm unlikely to trust everything that a conversational variation of the search engine does. So it's that's one issue. I find the explainability question to be particularly important, and of course, people in neural nets have been trying to figure out how to explain what it is doing, and you know, as the or predict what it is doing, and as the originator of ChatGPT says, well, I can't, and that's a good thing. I think that's probably an answer we're going to have to get beyond. So I think we need to find a way to not use it for such things that it can't explain, and find other technologies that can, and then merge the two of them together. Great. So that's how I'm thinking this is going to evolve.
Let's switch to something a little bit more fundamental. I think Jonathan's question is a good one. How would you describe the difference between natural language processing, NLP, and conversational AI, if they are different, and what is the advantage of each? Just like in clarifying questions. It's good to have that out, I think.
Well, that's an interesting question. In fact, you know, prior to the natural language processing, there was something called computational linguistics, where you were actually using the study of language as part of figuring out how to build such a system. Then it became very statistical, and much of the linguistics fell by the wayside. And now, as a language model, it's arguably doing not much natural language processing. And perhaps the retort would be, well, it shows you how little we need in order to generate something that's very, that's impressively fluent. And I think that's, to the extent that you have a system that's an imitator rather than a true producer of language, that is producing it for a reason, and it's trying to refer to something for a reason, etc. That's building more of an AI to it than simply figuring out what's the next word in a massive corpus. So to the extent that that works for small problems, that's great. I don't think that that's going to solve your, quote, true natural language processing per se. I mean, there was a paper that came out a while back that said these systems, and they're no different, you know, the new one is no different than the previous ones, are stochastic parrots. Okay. And I think that gives them too much credence. I had a parrot, a blue-fronted Amazon parrot, and they're smarter than neural nets in that they have intentions. And how do I know it has an intention? Well, you know, a hallmark of intention is if you don't achieve something, you go back and try it again. And I would come home with my briefcase and pass my parrot, and it would say hello. And if I didn't interact with it and went into my office, it would go hello, trying to get me to come back and do it again. So the animals are actually smarter than these neural nets in some regards. That is, they do have mental states, whereas the neural nets are, you know, keep this in mind. What it does is it's predicting the next word very cleverly, very impressively, but it's not it's not doing, quote, natural language processing per se.
I'm going to take another question. Yeah, go ahead, Alex, please.
I have been watching the chat here a little bit. Some of the folks in the audience are saying, well, we talked about all the dangers and caveats and hand-wringing over what it cannot do, etc. I think there's also the question, what will it do and what can we do with it and what is the positive future on this? And let me try to respond to this a little bit. It's saying, I think when I'm reminded of two phases in my own career. One is when the internet, the invention of the World Wide Web came about. I had the same reaction. I said, we had this already. We had internet, we did FTP and Telnet and so on. And we had HyperCard for many years before that, and suddenly it exploded. Something happened that made it societally so big that it took off, and here we are in a world that couldn't live without it anymore. The same with neural nets. I was in neural nets working on this as a researcher in the 80s, and people ignored it. And then suddenly it exploded 10, 20 years later. So what changes? What makes this happen? And I think it's two things. One is the performance, when the performance leap is just big enough that you can't ignore it. And the second is when the simplicity and the access to the technology becomes so simple that it becomes accessible to everyone. And I think we reach this in these language models also. Language models are around already for 40 years. IBM did trigrams and so on, and predicting the next work was part of every speech recognizer for 20, 30 years already, right? And suddenly now there is this huge explosion, huge interest. Why? Because I think that we have reached a certain performance level, and the access is so simple. Anyone can sit in front of it, play with it, and toy with it. So where does that leave us? Where do we position ourselves as companies, right? I think it is in the assurance of quality. And you mentioned the fuse, right? Somebody made a lot of money inventing fuses, right? We will get tools that give us a variety of options to choose from, right? And now what do you do with these options, right? There needs to be an intelligent post-processing. There need to be good interfaces that allow you to choose a summary, automatically generated summaries, for example. Many of us are working on that. Do you trust it? Does it really answer your own questions and your own needs? No. So we need tools that let you enhance it and make your own nodes with it, that make it seamless between this generic technology and what your needs are actually. It means, again, it's like a library. You go to the library and it has everything you can possibly want, but now you want to really give it your own spin, and we need interfaces and tools and mechanisms that bring that really home to the individual. And I think that's the great opportunity to all the companies we're talking about here, is to be the next deliverer of quality that builds on top of that.
Yep. So there, I'm going to have this question for you. So there, Karen Sever asked, there are ways to wield ChatGPT to help folks with AI literacy. Not only that, if we can help struggling students with topic starters and it can be incorporated into lesson plans in a meaningful way. If you're looking for an industry or corporate application at the enterprise level, are you looking at applications of the tool via API in the ed tech space?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's an easy one, right? I mean, that's where there's least amount of kind of issues with the outcome. But it's, APIs are, so there are, ChatGPT by itself does not have APIs, but there are a lot of other tools in the market which have these APIs. And, in EdTech space, summarizing, paraphrasing, explaining is the best use case. And I think EdTech space is one of the first ones which will be easily able to adopt these technologies. So the answer is yes. I mean, there are already APIs. It's not ChatGPT, but ChatGPT 3, and then there are other systems as well. Yes.
Well, there's now an arms race, of course, of people submitting their essays written by ChatGPT versus, so as a conversation, as a topic starter, where, how does that shade into, well, why don't you just write the whole thing for me, versus other, tools that are attempting to determine, was this written by a bot? Okay, just like having some kind of a watermark on the essay. Mm-hmm. And that's a, so that has to be invented before educators are going to be comfortable letting students have this as, behind the scenes, and being able to predict whether or not they're grading their students or the computer. So yes, we have the same issue with deep fakes.
So
Yeah.
as Jyoti said, there's a GPT-0 tool in the market invented by a student himself, right?
Yep.
That
yep.
actually says whether
Well,
this
if
answer
it-
was.
Yeah, who knows how good it is, but yes.
Yeah.
So that's the arms race that's going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. I think folks are asking about the early days. What I'm saying about early days is the ecosystem that's going to form around it for protection, regulation, things like that. I think the big problem though we have is it's running away so fast. Trying to have all the other systems catch up with it is going to be the big challenge. And I think Alan Furstenberg asked that very correctly, right? He said, we may say it's the early days and we shouldn't run with it, but companies are 100% true. How do we manage this in the enterprise without falling behind our competitors, right? Those that are responsible, they cannot wait for frameworks to show up, right? So everybody's sort of just running it. Do we expect self-regulation? Yes, no?
Yeah. Well, we have regulators and they're usually many years behind
Yes.
the ability to, people's ability to innovate. So you're going to have to do self-regulation. And the way it's going to end up happening, unfortunately, is through the legal system. Or the markets, as Google's one day mistake showed. So those kind of risks are what catches people's attention, and I think the market risks are probably the first and the fastest to come to fruition. So yeah, let's experiment as much as we can, but and be as innovative as we can. But we have to be cautious in what we actually let loose to customers.
Yeah. So the one barrier or that I would have everybody think through is you don't want to end up in the AI Hall of Shame. That is actually a database. Everybody should go look it up. It is published. Wired Magazine has a link. I always tell our clients, listen, our job is to make sure you don't show up on it. And there are a lot of companies and governments on there. You should go look it up. Johan Stromberg, hopefully I'm pronouncing folks' names correctly. My apologies if I'm not. If people and companies could contribute to the facts and truths like Wikipedia, that would help speeding up trust. Now it's from one source. Any knowledge if companies or anyone would be able to contribute with facts? I think we've had a huge problem with fake news, and that's a fantastic question because it was trained on data until 2021. Who was in charge of making sure that there was no fake stuff going in there? Thoughts? Anyone?
Doesn't Wikipedia actually have a vetting process?
I believe they
you can't just enter data. Now,
right.
And look, I've tried this with ChatGPT. I tell it, I ask it or give it a prompt, it gives me an answer, and I say that's not correct. I try to correct it. He said, "Oh yes, you're correct," and then in the next utterance, it gives me back its original answer. Okay, so by design, it's not correctable, because if I could change what it says without going through some vetting process, then you could get people entering all kinds of malevolent information into it, getting it to spew racist hate speech or what have you. So I understand that, but that's, again, its limitation. If it's going to give you incorrect information, you have to be able to correct it. And the correcting process may require a training process and a vetting process, which is very expensive. It's not merely telling it something. A lot of these systems can't learn by being told, okay, and using that data. So that's a trade-off that I understand why it is the way it is, but it's still something that needs to be worked through, particularly for any industry whose output is important to the customer.
Because it looks like education is key here, right? I think educating folks on not just the fact that this is a tool, because in the end it's a tool, but if you don't use it correctly, you could be creating a lot of damage. And unfortunately, we're going to see, I think, a lot of damage before controls are put in. Regulation usually comes in as a stick, right? And carrots are just the way humanity works. I'm going to take one more question, just keeping an eye on the clock here as well. So Leslie Pound's asking, this group seems to be missing an HCI expert, human-computer interaction expert. What does human language infer to users? Can you talk about how people judge content based on the language, as in who is talking to them, etc.? Is that part of the framework? as you assess language models?
I was one of the founders of the co-founders, or in the steering committee of the HCI department at Carnegie Mellon. So it's not completely without
I've worked in the field myself. Yeah.
However, you're making still a good point. And in fact, I'm passionate about this because I think a lot of it is about the interface. How do you bring it really to people, both from the learning aspect as well as from the delivery of quality, right? Perhaps another side point to what was just said, a worrisome element is the concentration of knowledge and I'm encouraged by many alternative attempts by many companies to have at least variety, because again, Wikipedia was mentioned, the internet was mentioned, all of them can be manipulated and can be distorted. And we all know that, and it's a discussion, right? The social media, because what's in the internet and what's out there is there forever. The internet doesn't forget. And that's a scary thing when there's false information or damaging information out there. So once again, I think it's business opportunities at the end, because these societal efforts, need to be maintained. Someone in the chat said, for example, is that a business opportunity to have fact checking, to have, some kind of management controls, human HCI interfaces that make present alternatives more intelligently, and I think we'll see that happening. So in that sense, I'm positive, cautiously positive, but I think we need to move in that direction.
But to do so, you have to have access to the innards. And OpenAI, although it used to be a nonprofit, no longer is. So you don't actually. You don't know what it's trained on. And if you were to add your corporate data to it and have it running in your corporate data center, you'd be mixing your corporate data with something else. Yes, and you don't know what that something else is. So maybe you get a stripped down version of it such that you could put in all your corporate documents and have it use that as your knowledge base, for which it'll cost you, I'm sure. But the business opportunity is building these things for anyone. And the technology isn't that complicated, all things considered. And the papers are out there on how to do it. So being able to do it on your own is probably something large enough corporations might want to attempt.
Yeah, and that's why, for example, efforts like this European language model initiative that is now going through the Bundestag in Germany is trying to prevent that from happening, that it's all because it's just a black box. I mean, people are doing prompt engineering, right? I mean, to get the answer you need, you have to manipulate the prompt. You're not really doing anything to the learning algorithm system, and you're feeding it data when you don't really know where that data ends up and so forth. So the European initiative, for example, is worried about, according to European law, you can't use ChatGPT for healthcare because you need to feed it healthcare information, and that's illegal, right? So, so once again, it really calls for alternatives and maybe some form of federated learning where you're doing stuff in the cloud and some things on premise, right?
In fact, there are new job roles, LM ops, language model op, people who are in charge of the prompts.
Yeah, I think from a first of all, thank you, everybody. I know we've hit the top of the hour here. I think there's a lot more to come. There's going to be more conversations. By no means is this the only one, but I think we've covered, a pretty good side of all the dimensions. And again, there is a distinct difference between enterprise-grade conversational AI and ChatGPT as a tool. It is not a complete tool. You have to look at an entire framework, which is why I encourage everybody to really read through what enterprise-grade technologies mean. So in wrapping up, for the team, so as the enterprise business and technology leaders, right, if you guys want to get, a demo or engage with the team more, please have them. I think Jamie's going to be putting down, and I'll put that down here as well. If you can go ask for demos. And Openstream is also attending the Call and Contact Center Expo, April 26th to the 27th in Vegas. We're also having Voice in September this year. Yep, and we're changing to Voice of AI. And it's September 5th through the 7th in DC. It's going to be a massive event. So if you guys are enjoying this conversation, you want to learn more, because obviously a lot of things are happening, moving at high speed, please attend those conferences, engage with the team. You know, the more we have dialogues around here, I think the better off we'll be. This is exactly where we need to head to be more responsible as we handle technologies like ChatGPT. So thank you, everybody. Sudhir, Phil, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your insights. And hopefully there'll be more to come. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Our pleasure. Thank you.